Hello, this is Jane Parsons-Fein, and I thank you for listening. Here is my podcast for June 8th, 2015. For more information about Milton Erickson, please visit us online at miltonericksondvds.com. Following is an excerpt from an interview with me by Alex Vesely, director of Wizard of the Desert, courtesy of Noetic Films. I do hope you enjoy this podcast. Thank you. I think because of having read Uncommon Therapy and looking into Erickson a little bit before I went, I think that I was prepared that he was dressed in purple. I was prepared for the amethyst bolo. I was I felt like a little, well, and he set it up that way too. Everybody sits around and he comes in and he sits there and he doesn't say anything. And then he asks us to write down some information on a paper. Well, this is instant regression back to first grade or kindergarten. Instant. And so, and I remember feeling like a little kid when he first came in and he sits there and he's, and he doesn't say anything and everybody's, waiting expectantly. And he was wonderful at suspense. And he'd set up something that and you're waiting expectantly to hear what's going to happen in the case. And he was a great storyteller. So you never were bored. I mean, you could never be bored. I think that if you had somebody that had an expectation and was disappointed, it's possible that maybe they couldn't get past their openness to a new experience. It's kind of like if you're driving, in the look-back mirror, like, a lot of people, say if they want to get married, this is who they're going to, and they have this picture in their mind and they're so busy looking for the picture that they may miss somebody.
Is there now the possibility to understand better what he actually did than at the time when he was around?
I don't know how to answer that question because it depends on how the person grows. I think people very often learn without knowing that they're learning. And I think, it's kind of what a friend of mine calls the mole phenomenon, that the mole will go underground and if you tell a patient something, and you may say it 25 times, and it goes on, you don't know whether they really heard you or not. And then about 4 months later, they suddenly say, I just had this great idea, and you knocked your brains out to tell them. And until they're ready, they can't hear it. And I think Erickson knew that. And I think people sometimes probably, I don't know, but I would think that, if they do come back or if they do suddenly have some ideas that they didn't have before, it's possible that some of them, that they were too frightened or too defended or too stuck in their own expectations. That I think that Erickson was a challenge in that sense. I think that he was scary in the sense because you went there. I think that if I hadn't had the experience at Mount Sinai, sitting around and listening to endless discussions of pathology and people really trying, but missing the boat. And Erickson didn't miss the boat. At least I didn't think he did, and that's what I wanted to find out. And what I found out in terms of my own experience was that whatever he said to me wove itself into my life and into my choices somehow when I didn't even realize it until later. What happened to me one time, the second time I went, I had been divorced and I was with somebody I wanted to marry very much later, maybe 6 years later. And he didn't want to get married because he was much older than I was. His wife had died. And he just didn't want to get married again. And we had many arguments and breakups and, restaurants that we couldn't go back to because I'd run out in tears and he'd have to pay the bill and follow. And we had this kind of relationship. And when I went to Erickson, I had this question of what should I do about Arnold? And but when he got to me, I was so scared that I made some dumb question up about psychoanalysis. And I think he said, "You'll dream the answer," or something. And then he started talking about one case after another of people with these really bad problems that I suddenly thought, I wonder if he thinks that that's my problem. Or does he really think that I could be? And I finally had to interrupt him and say, "Dr. Erickson, I chickened out. What I really need to ask you is this man I'm involved with." And his answer, after I told him about we'd had these fights, he said, I told him, "I don't know what to do." And he said, and his answer was, "He'll circle and circle and circle around you, and I don't know whether he'll land." That was exactly what he said. And so I came home, and sometime after that, it's a long story. I wanted him to. He said he'd go into Tiffany's if he ever got me an engagement ring. So on my birthday, I got a blue box, and I think it's the engagement ring. Well, it turns out to be 2 earrings. And I was so mad. I was so mad at him. I mean, I threw them at him at some point. But anyway, then I realized, wait a second, he got into Tiffany's, and also he got 2 rings instead of 1. What's the matter with me? And then I decided, you know what, I prefer him to anybody else I'd seen around. And I'd see him like 3-4 times a week anyway. Why do I have to get married? So I decided then and there, I'm going to have a career, and I'm going to be happy with Arnold. And so I went off with Virginia Satir for, I don't know, up to Park City, Utah for a group. And I don't know, it was like about 6 weeks, 4 weeks, something like that. And who calls me up on the telephone deciding that he wants to come to Park City, Utah? So that all happened. It worked its way into my life. But I know that what he said to me, this thing of circling and circling and circling, well, if he's going to really circle, then do I want to hang around or not?
Right.
And I decided, yes, I did. So a lot of what he does is give you the choice, but he's kind of set it up so that, the best of you works, as I saw it. At least that worked out. I think that the one thing I wanted to say, which I think is so important, is that it has to do with movement. It has to do with Erickson saw now people, we have pacing and leading with NLP and all of that. But what Erickson did was stay in absolute congruence with the movement of what was going on, and also shifting from one state to another. We never know that we're doing this. If people could learn that they're in one state or in another state, and know when they're in it, and be able to be so clear about it that they can be conscious about what they're doing, it would be infinitely better in the whole world for people to be able to live together. I think Erickson saw shifts of movement. Feldenkrais did something called awareness through movement, how the body, the more you become tuned into your body, the more it can heal. And that's not true with everything, of course, but and I think Erickson was very tuned into how to get his body to move again by imagining things, using imagery. And when he was working with people, when he was working with us, he was always, he didn't miss anything. He was always kind of a little bit he was with us, but there was always movement, even in the silences.
Therapy as a performance, as a performing art. It has to do with movement, with shifting, with silence.
Yeah, because I think great performance, now performance in the best sense of the word performance. I think performance of really great people, Yo-Yo, for example, or Perlman, that these people come straight out of their unconscious. And that's why Mozart, you know, that poor old Salieri may have been very popular during his time, but he didn't come from himself. And so nobody, unless you saw the movie or saw the play, most people don't even know who he was. Right. And yet they, with little babies, I know a lady that with her child, she got Mozart for the child to equalize the brain, you know, the hemispheres. Yeah. Mozart, apparently, a lot of research that, and she, when she was pregnant, she had this thing wrapped, tied around her waist with Mozart playing with this little baby. And now the baby, after the baby's born, they play Mozart, and the little child would just, you know, just go into a wonderful state. So that Erickson was. You know, I don't know this much about chaos theory, but I had the feeling that he was like the strange attractor. I went to a big conference, mathematicians and like all kinds of physicists, and they none of them knew either. All they know is that there's something you think is that's the way it is, and then something comes in from left field, which is the strange attractor, which is much more complicated in terms of math, etc. But I think that in terms of our field, in terms of psychotherapy and psychoanalysis, I think that Erickson is our strange attractor. I think that Erickson saw that when people are in touch with their need, the part of themselves that can grow with happiness, joy, comfort, ease, that he said, discover their patterns of happiness. I think that he focused, and I often wondered when I'm looking at these tapes, you know, he says, trust your unconscious, it knows more than you do. And I suddenly thought, why did he use the word unconscious? You know, there's lots of literature about the unconscious, apparently going all the way back before Freud, but that Freud was supposed to have discovered it. But I think that Erickson's view of it wasn't of something that was a structure or something that was linear, the id, ego, superego, or you know, the vast cauldrons of instinctual urges, etc. And as Lashan said, he was talking about the case of Nora with Freud. He said, Freud talked about repressed sexuality, but he never talked about repressed creativity. And I think Erickson was always looking for that which was health, healing, that happiness, that joy, wonder. Ernie Rossi talks about this. The wonder of a child learning something, or the pleasure of looking at a color or the combination of colors or listening to music, that these are really what people need in order to heal within themselves. And and I think that his basis was to discover these, to reframe the static. It's a mixed metaphor, but anyway. And I think that he really reframed the idea of, quote, the unconscious. And that is a very huge thing to do, and I don't think very many people understand that. Erickson knew, and he has a quote that is, I can't remember it, having to do with, I think that he knew that the only way people could learn from him was through their own experience and that's right brain, and that if you try to codify it, or if you try, you can do it. This is Lachance just written that book. Linnaeus did it, I think, in terms of plants. That if you do it, you lose it. That what is happening is that Erickson is kind of, he didn't want to be quoted. He wrote papers. There are many, many books written about him. But I think what he did was just throw seeds out all the time. Seeds of experience and of feeling and compassion and of reframing and clear-eyed. He was clear-eyed about life. He was clear-eyed about the absurdity of life. He was clear-eyed about people that couldn't make it, maybe even evil. But he confronted it. There was a client that had a reputation for never paying his bills, and he said he was smarter than I was, but my unconscious was smarter than him. And it's a case that we have here. There just isn't anything that he didn't filter through a way that purifies the clarity of his thinking. But it's not thinking, it's experiencing the thought.
Is it that the very model that modern psychotherapy is based on and what Erickson did are simply not compatible?
Well, of course, the minute you say that, I'm thinking like Erickson. I'm not going to say that, because the minute I say that, somebody's going to come along and make them compatible. Because you can't say, you see, I think that there may have been many things. Erickson worked with psychoanalysts. Erickson, I think, had a profound respect for all of the disciplines of science. But I think that what Erickson did was to reframe it in terms of what he saw as a kind of movement toward, as a kind of evolutionary movement, and that you can't codify that. That I don't think that energy, that the kind of experiential learning that he talked about is affects energy. Now I don't even know what that means myself, because but that it's a paradox, that once you think you've got something, in a box, that's when it all changes. And you see, but I think that Erickson saw that that people could respond to those parts of themselves that were able to enjoy, to have the positive feelings, that it wasn't all death instinct and all of those things were there, but it wasn't a concept of an instinct. It was an experience of the self that he worked with.
Do you think that is why he did not want, or was he completely honest when he said he did not want a school to be named after him?
Oh, I think so. Because once you name a school, that's it. Finished.
Then you have the box.
Yeah. Look at the hospitals. I hate to say this. Or look at Congress. Any organization that once they think that they've codified them, so to speak, themselves, then they have to keep doing the same thing in order to survive.
And yet he must have known that, of course, the impact that he had will go beyond him, and that there's going to be people who will try to codify him, as you say.
Erickson said, "Be your own natural self." I tried to do it the way somebody else did, and it was a mess. What Erickson said is, don't follow me. Find who you are And that was, I really think he believed that. I think he went for the capacity for growth in each person. But I think his idea of growth was not analyzing defenses, which is a left brain phenomenon, but people experiencing themselves in reaction to life in new ways. And that the new ways come from a different way that they feel in terms of their relationship with self. And I think that's what he did. He did relationship with self, and he did it in a way that sometimes turned it around so that there were possibilities that people never even saw, never even thought of. And he could do it with humor and wit and great compassion.
If we could bring him back for a moment, and you could ask him one question, what would that be?
I think I'd ask him about, how did you learn to be so comfortable with your own unconscious? He was brilliant as a little kid. I knew his sister Bertha. And I mean, even as a little kid, he was, he was curious. I don't know. I guess I'd ask him questions like, how do you help people to become more curious about themselves, or how do you segue into their wanting more joy in their life and allowing for the possibility of it. You see, I think he wasn't. I'd ask him. You have so much hope in the unconscious, and people learning how to trust the unconscious. How do you reframe it? How do you think about reframing it in situations where it doesn't look like it's going to work?
That's a good question.
That's what I'd ask him.
What do you think he would say?
You can probably come up with some,
Yeah.
He'd probably come back to me with a question. When did you ever think that it wasn't going to work and it did work? And how did that happen? And he'd probably say that that's what he would do. I wouldn't even presume to say what he'd say, but I think that he always went back to experience. And he said, and this is one of the differences between his way of doing hypnosis and traditional hypnosis. He said, you can do traditional deeper hypnosis and the person will follow you. But but what is important is you access the pattern and give the experience of the pattern to the person. Then introduce the new variable. You can't introduce a new variable unless the pattern is already there. And that is really, I think, major. I think he was always, and I have to, now that I'm saying this, I got to go back and look at some of the, I think he always was impeccable with making sure he did the seeding, that he got the pattern before he did he was very careful about the preparation before he then did what you might call the zinger transforming thing.
And you used such a nice metaphor before, and maybe you can just give me that so I have it on tape. You said when people came, they were running on 4 cylinders or something.
Right.
And can you just say that just as an
Yeah,
expression?
I mean, this is absolutely true. There are so many people. Kay, my loving, wonderful Kay Thompson. I mean, and all the people that I've known around Erickson. Many of them were 8-cylinder people going on 4 cylinders. After they were with Erickson, they are now running on 8. And I think I would I would not be, I'm not running on 8, I wish I were, but I think I'm more than I was when I was, God knows, let's hope so. But I don't think anybody could be around him without being enhanced in their humanity or their sense of self or their appreciation of small things.
Great. Enhancement. So enhancement was really...
Enhancement, yeah. He enhanced everybody's life in the way he worked.